Well, good afternoon and welcome everyone here in person and those joining us virtually online. I'm Landon Darren. I'm the Senior Director of the Atlantic Council Global Energy Center, and really enthusiastic to welcome you to a conversation, a timely and exciting conversation on the role of operational energy as a critical component of military readiness and resilience. I'm particularly excited about this event because it's a culmination of a year-long effort to create an energy and defense practice here at the Atlantic Council. This is a growing effort that is dedicated to understanding how energy shapes military readiness and strategy, but also how the rapid evolution of technology, of geopolitics and infrastructure, the changes in all of those have an impact on the military solutions, the readiness, and how we engage with our partners and allies. This conversation is and will be the first of many as we lead up and culminate our convenings on operational energy, on installation energy, on the strategic relevance of energy within the military establishment during our Energy and Defense Summit later this year. A convening that will bring together leaders across government, military, and industry to address core challenges in the intersection of energy, defense, and national security. Today's panel brings together experts from academia, policy, military, and industry backgrounds on how operational energy is shaping the modern battlefield. Energy is a decisive factor in military effectiveness, given that it fuels our weapon systems, our autonomous platforms, and it remains a critical vulnerability both to our adversaries and to ourselves as we look to source the power behind our military readiness. As the Department of Defense works to enhance force readiness, integrate emerging technologies, and operate in increasingly contested environments, the Atlantic Council Global Energy Center and our Scowcroft Center are excited to help exercise these ideas and think about the policy landscape together. Today's discussion will examine these dynamics, assess where progress has been made, identify ongoing challenges, and explore how policymakers, military leaders, and industry partners can work together to drive innovation in operational energy and ensure mission success in an era of renewed strategic competition. Before I turn things over to our moderator, a reminder that this discussion is being live streamed. It's on the record, and we invite those that have questions to join us using askac.org so you can be a part of the conversation as well. With that, it's my pleasure to hand over the podium to Reed Blakemore, who is Director of Research and Programs at the Atlantic Council's Global Energy Center. Reed, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Landon, for that kind introduction. I think you echoed a lot of what I think I was hoping to preface this discussion with. So I'll be brief in saying we, in the Energy Center particularly, frequently talk about energy security being a key part of national security. And of course, national security is also intimately engaged with how we think about the defense community's role and engagement with energy overall. And I think that's why we're really excited to have this esteemed panel to talk through what we should be thinking about in the context of operational energy, what the opportunities and risks are in that space, both now and as we build the future force. And to that end, I'm pleased to welcome a really strong panel here today to help us explore this issue. We have Rebecca Sakowicz, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Energy Resilience and Optimization at the Office of Assistant Secretary of Defense for Energy Installations and the Environment. We have Captain Newt McKissick, Senior Military Advisor at the Defense Innovation Unit. We have Rear Admiral James Murdoch, the Pele Program Director at BWXT. We have Professor Brenda Schaefer, a non-resident senior fellow at the Global Energy Center here at the Atlantic Council, but also a faculty associate at the Naval Postgraduate School. And we have Matthew Suprasinski, the Chief Engineer for Power and Control Systems at Northrop Grumman. Welcome, all of you. And I think to kick things off and help us with this overview of what we mean when we say operational energy, Brenda, I think I'll start with you. And I'll start by actually saying, you actually wrote the book on operational energy right here, and it's available everywhere where fine books are sold. I would encourage everyone to give it a read because it is incredibly insightful in terms of how we think about these issues. But Brenda, operational energy is a critical piece of how we think about military readiness and resilience and its effectiveness to do, for the DoD and our warfighter, to do what we need them to do. To kick us off, can you provide an overview of what operational energy is and how it acts as both a constraint and as an enabler on military power?
Right. So throughout history, energy's been an important power enabler of that's set the outcome of battles and of wars, and also a constraint. So if you didn't have or use your energy properly, you couldn't use your military in the places at the time and the distances that you wanted to use it. And throughout history, different forces have disrupted the energy supplies to each other. This was a very sort of basic bedrock of war fighting. And in the current period, while we use maybe less absolute units of energy in the battlefield, but we need more precise types of fuels, there's more specifics, they're technically more complicated. And we're trying to, in the case of the US military, we may find ourselves many times when we're operating over very large distances on different continents and often simultaneously in different battle zones. So providing the energy for all those operations is quite a challenge. And at the same time, thinking about how to disrupt energy supplies to our adversaries. Now, since World War II, the US has enjoyed undisrupted or uncontested logistics, and specifically of energy. So we could have wars all over the world, even in landlocked Afghanistan. So maybe there's a high price to get fuel in, but it was able to do it. The current world is very different. The access of China, Iran, and Russia are published study how to disrupt US energy supplies during war. They understand that this is a strategic vulnerability, and they even write about it openly in their different doctrinal discussions and different strategic documents. So our enemies will try to disrupt the sources, and as wars become more and more hybrid war, and the borders between the domestic front and the war zone have been blurred, we're going to find a lot more challenges to U.S. domestic energy infrastructure and energy security. And so we need to think about not only about energy and war, but also the security of our domestic energy supplies throughout the year.
So actually, I want to quickly follow up on that one point, because you mentioned the nature of hybrid warfare and how in some ways how we think about the security of our energy system is both one of military readiness, but also has a close relationship with how we think about civilian energy security. Can you talk a little bit about where those two areas intersect and perhaps also where they differ? Because I think understanding those two pieces is critical to how we think about the response to securing those respective systems.
Right. So where they overlap, by and large, the U.S. military uses civilian supply lines for its energy. So that makes a lot of sense when you think about a price, and you think about resourcefulness, effectiveness. But in the reality, that creates also a lot of vulnerabilities, and especially when you think of supply lines outside the United States. If the different administrations talk about a pivot to Asia, engagement in Asia, So we've enjoyed, for instance, in Europe, dedicated energy infrastructure. You have the Central European pipeline system. You have dedicated energy storage. You have members of NATO that store energy for the use of the US military in time of conflict. We don't have anything that replicates that in Asia. And actually, even just the physical geography, the fact that US allies are not, they don't have, they're islands and they don't have any territorial continuity. This creates a lot of challenges, and including the fact that, you might get to a port and discover that that port is run by a Chinese company, or that the grid, the electric grid in a certain Asian country, that actually the grid operator himself is maybe secretly, part of a Chinese network. And so we have this challenge, and we also have just fundamentally, when commercial or domestic energy, civilian energy systems are built actually to fail at peak demand, meaning that we take into consideration, when you design a system at the really, really top peak, you're not going to be able to supply energy to all your civilians. You're going to have a blackout, or rolling brownouts or blackouts at a peak demand period. And we say that that's an efficient way to run a system. Well, actually, in the military, it's actually when there's peak demand is when you have to deliver. It's when actually you're in battle, when you're in war, when you have the highest amount of demand for energy, and the most complicated demand for energy is when you can't fail, because you're going to lose the battle and or lose the war. So the whole system, operational energy, has to be much more effective. It has to be perfect. Where in the civilian sector, we can allow for not to meet peak demand.
So three threads that I want to pull out from your comments there that I think will help us guide the discussion moving forward is, when we think about the energy demand from the defense community, it's the precision of that energy demand in terms of what we need and how we need it delivered. It's frankly the logistics of distance to relevant theaters that we want to operate in, but it's also this idea of kind of new paradigms of how that energy can be disrupted depending on where we want to send the warfighter, what installations we need in order to train the warfighter to ensure they're ready, but also the fact that energy security now is a two-way vulnerability, both for us and potentially for our adversaries, that could be exploited. Rebecca, I want to go to you next, actually, to bring in the DoD's approach to this. The Pentagon's energy resilience strategy is fundamentally tied to military readiness. How does DoD ensure that operational energy policies support those things, training, development, and overall force effectiveness?
That's a great question. So there's a natural linkage that I think we often forget about within the operational energy context, which is the need for resilience at the base, right? Our bases are points of entry for training, for the mission, for continuity, and for support. So at the end of the day, how we think about this, I hate calling it a kill chain, but how we think about the kill chain of force identification all the way to force execution has to have installation resilience and energy readiness contextualized within that paradigm. So when we think about it on that continuum, it allows us then to say, okay, well, what are the priorities, right? That is going to come, those priorities are going to change both from administration to administration, but also from COCOM to COCOM, depending on where we are in our global, and in our engagement with our global partners and adversaries. So it is very much an interwoven dependency, and frequently we think about these things in silos. How do we handle and tackle our O plans? How do we handle and tackle our installation or base readiness and resilience? How do we think about what the increasingly privatized civilian supply chain looks like in a long duration contested logistics war game, right? How do these things happen in disparate factions? Well, they need to come together under this umbrella of a singular intent, because if we don't have singularity in that intent, the disconnect ultimately creates vacuums for failure, and that's not acceptable. So it's very much a system of systems, which is hard enough when you think about it in smaller organizations than the Department of Defense, and now you layer in the complexities of the department, and that becomes, that system of systems is a system unto itself. So orchestration becomes tantamount.
You mentioned this continuum of needs, right? Force to force, combatant command to combatant command. And when you again layer that over the complexity of energy logistics, how do you and your colleagues at DoD play that coordinating role throughout combatant commands, installations, and as well with industry partners to fundamentally ensure that energy is available when and where it's needed?
So there's let's say two answers to that question amongst many, but the first is my office within the Office of the Secretary is thinking about how do we orchestrate across the COCOMs, the services, everyone from our civilian partners all the way through our uniformed staff. So the Office of the Secretary is that the Grand Maestro, and we're happy to sit within the office of that context so that we can do sufficient orchestration within the paradigm of these disparate actors within the department. Separately, as we think about how we become less dependent on civilian supply chains, civilian grid systems, we are thinking about diversification wherever possible, right? The most difficult resource to attack is one that is small and many, vice something that is singular and very large. So wherever we can think about innovation opportunities to diversify that landscape, we're going to. Wherever we can place fuel logistics in a diffuse and diverse way, it is much harder to take then that fuel offline when there are many targets. And thinking about how do we, in a thoughtful and manner that is providing best value to the department and to the government, diversify the sources of that fuel through technology innovation, through landscape evaluation of different types of friendshoring opportunities with partners, so that adversaries aren't controlling the sole source of a singular widget. And thinking about that diffuse nature wherever possible to add additional layers of complexity, but simplify for ourselves.
I hear you on the point that if the problems in some ways is complexity, and we can work to resolve or at least mitigate that complexity through diversity. And I'm going to use that as an opportunity to turn to Matt. We're talking a lot here about the range of modern military systems and the complexity of the power solutions that they require. From your perspective, what are the biggest challenges associated with integrating diverse energy sources into mission equipment?
Yeah, thank you, Reed. And thanks to Atlantic Council for hosting this, putting a spotlight on energy, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to participate. Northrop Grumman has a very wide portfolio of products from undersea to in space. And common to that is energy in one form or another. And it usually has to be converted, and it has to be managed to be effective to the end effector, if you will. And that's a very diverse product across the board. And so there's discussions about, let's make things small and distributed. We have a vehicle that's got hybrid energy storage. It's just sitting there as a vehicle. How can I, use that operationally? How can I get that into a microgrid? I've got solar panels, let's say, that I want to integrate. I've got energy storage batteries that I want to integrate, whatever the case may be. So we're a long ways from when we just stuck the 60 hertz diesel generator on the ground and everybody plugged into it, and you just hummed along. We've got larger mission packages now that want more power. They're more dynamic. And so the challenges facing that diversity and to be able to create systems that are resilient and reliable is being able to bring all those different sources together. And that's done through the power electronics, being able to take a DC system, get it onto a microgrid, come bring your vehicle and plug it in. I've got some microturbine high-speed generator that's putting out 600 hertz. Nothing runs off of that 600 hertz, so I got to convert that. So you have all these different types of sources that we need to be able to bring together into a microgrid. And then dealing with those loads, they're very dynamic. Laser will go from no load to full load and no load to full load. And I'm sure you've sat at your tiny dining room table and you see the lights dim when the AC turns on. We'll put 100 of them out there and turn it on at the same time. So dealing with those dynamics are very important. And that really comes down to the controllability of the power electronics, and that comes down to effectively managing the energy storage that's in the system. So when that laser turns on, if I can yank energy out of the battery to support that demand, and then when it turns off, I take that same energy and jam it back in the battery So that load can do whatever it wants to do, but yet I present to the source just a nice constant. It looks like a toaster oven, just nice and easy while you can go off and do things with your lasers or your radar. So decoupling those kinds of dynamics from the system, being able to bring the different energy sources together into one microgrid, having an architecture that has the flexibility and scalability to do that. So when something new shows up, I can deal with it and I can integrate that. And I can be a small island somewhere, or I could be a much larger system that maybe megawatts versus something more tactical that's a kilowatt range. So it's really that flexibility of architecture and that ability with the power electronics, the controls, and to seamlessly integrate that energy storage really gives you a kind of complete flexibility and control over that power system.
I want to put a pin and come back to, in a few minutes, this idea of flexibility, but also agility when we think about the construction of these systems, as Rebecca mentioned. But first, Newt, I want to come to you. We've spent a lot of time dancing around these ideas of the next generation of technologies, both on the operational side, but also on the new technologies that are coming from the energy system itself. And I'd love to kind of hear your perspectives and the perspectives of DIU in terms of how it's grappling with that innovation horizon. What are the innovations and operational technologies that you see on the horizon, and how are we in the policy but also in the industrial community working to make sure that those technologies are being developed in ways which ensure that these critical defense systems are operating at their full potential?
That's a great question. Thank you. The complexity of the world and what we are seeing today, you look at Ukraine, you look at the use of artificial intelligence, the way that the world is waging war and the way that conflicts are taking place now is fundamentally different than it was decades and centuries ago. So that makes a complex and dynamic environment for how to supply these systems, how to enable these systems. And operational energy, if you boil it down for me, is enabling those effectors at the edge and the supply lines and chains to allow them to be successful. That has become extremely fragile when we just build it off of a single source grid. So what we are doing is we are looking that as a capability gap, something we as a department, as an organization, as an ecosystem need to get after. And we also realize that we are not the sole holders of the solutions. So what DIU has done is, and through great partnerships with Congress, with the department, with industry, with academia, with the entire ecosystem, is to say we are now shifting from a requirements bottom-up approach to a capabilities gap, problem set down. And we get combatant commanders to say, here is what I need to get after. Here is where I am fragile. Here is where I lack a capability. They give that to us, and we have special authorities to go to industry and to say and to make some key partnerships with academia and develop the solution set in ways that our traditional acquisition system lacked in the past. So we are also looking at, what is resiliency? Resiliency is anti-fragility in my mind. We don't have one single source, one single bit, single source of failure that makes the entire thing crumble. So as we talk about, are we going to do microgrids? Are we going to put, forward operating bases? It's a hybrid approach. These multitude of systems that are out there now require capabilities to be able to power them. There are technologies that are being developed that make huge gains in this, with hydrogen, with advanced voltaics, all sorts of different things. Pardon me. I was buying the book.
Yeah.
So
Well done.
The complexity of the world we are responding in a way that's, hey, we are going to our partners elsewhere in order to develop the solution sets. And it's speeding up the process. because now we don't have a 2-year requirements process to fight through, and a 5-year to 3 to 5 year funding process. Partnerships with OSD policy, with academia, and with industry, we can all get to the table together and quickly determine what needs to be done now and how do we employ that in a way, because the time horizon of the OODA loop of success or failure has gone from years in planning and execution, to effects that we would try to implement being, obsolete in 2 weeks. So the time horizons have shifted, the fragilities have exacerbated, but we're responding with new ways, new partnerships, and new capabilities.
I think we'll go through a second round of questions to really tackle these ideas of resilience and fragility as we deploy these new systems. But you did mention those new capabilities, and I think it's one of the things I'd like to do now is, Jim, I'd like to turn to you to ground the conversation a little bit, with a little bit of a case study. We frequently have seen, in this field, we've referenced Project Pele in particular as kind of one of those new operational opportunities. And it comes out of the Pentagon's recognition that deployable nuclear power can fill a compelling operational need. Can you explain a little bit, A, what that need is, and B, why Project Pele was selected as the solution to meet that need? And then a little bit in terms of where the progress that you've seen on Project Pele from BWXT's perspective.
Yeah, thank you. And once again, thanks to the Atlantic Council, and thanks to all of you for your interest and attendance and being willing to come out and listen to this group speak. I appreciate it. I think what really motivates us at BWXT is the relevance, the operational relevance of what Pele is. You talked about bringing nuclear power to the battlefield. That inherently means you're bringing all the fuel with you. So in the continuum of things that the warfighter needs in the field today, one of the things he always needs is electrical power, as we've discussed. That ranges from batteries to diesel generators and ultimately to Project Pele, okay? So that brings, in a transportable scale, that is in 20-foot ISO containers, about a megawatt plus of electrical power with transportability, relocatability, and endurance. And that is a substantial technical challenge that BWXT has been addressing very capably over the last couple of years of design work. I'm particularly glad to get out of the office and be able to come here today and talk about it and get myself out of the tactical day-to-day meetings on one side of this opportunity and more meetings before I go home on manufacturing decisions, because that's where we are today. To your question, what's the state of play with Pele? We recognize that the character of the battlefield now is different even than when Pele was conceived and awarded by SCO to our company. The idea was we'd do 1 to 5 megawatts for roughly 3 years of full power operation. That we'd be able to deploy it even down to airlifting. Pretty challenging thing to do, okay? And I think what's been borne out in the battlefield in Ukraine and other places recently shows us that drones, directed energy weapons, as my colleague Matt talked about, they're all out there consuming energy, and everything happens through command and control. Wanted to highlight 2 things that make Pele operationally relevant, because we give you that enduring power forward, as we used to say in the Navy, and we do it at some scale. Rebecca talked about how training is an important and essential element of joint warfighting capability, and that leads you back to not just the unit that's forward in the fight, but places that aren't that far away from home. So Pele ultimately could be scaled to provide power to those types of areas, and we feel that that's very important. So that supports the training. And then I guess the other thing that is really essential to effective military operations today is command and control, joint command and control, all domain command and control. And that's going to happen, as the COCOMs tell us, in places that aren't always very convenient to be or to refuel. So really our goal with Pele is to provide a relatively lightweight, high endurance, transportable power system that can be used various places around the world. I look forward to some follow-up questions on more, engineering details. I'm a mechanical engineering geek, so don't let me get too far off track on that. But the real critical thing of Pele is the operational relevance.
Not an engineer, so I think I won't be too hard of a taskmaster on the engineering questions. And I think I want to return to these ideas of what's next for not just Pele, but some of these other energy technologies, particularly when we talk about getting to scale and deployment. But for now, let's first, I will remind our audience, if you'd like to ask a question, please toss it into askac.org. I have the iPad. I'll be filtering those in for the rest of our conversation. But I want to return to these ideas around resilience and fragility. All right, both of which speak to an understanding of the various vulnerabilities that might exist in our operational energy system. Brenda, I think I'll start with you to tackle this idea of vulnerability. It's clear that in the range of possible theaters, we might see an urgent need for the DoD to plan for in the coming years. Those adversaries will undoubtedly view energy as a vulnerability of the United States, I think, as we've covered here. From targeting fuel supply chains to critical infrastructure and logistics network, from your perspective, what are those most pressing threats that we need to be thinking about as we begin planning that systems of systems? I'll stop there, and then we'll bring in Rebecca on this question as well.
Right. So I think two of the biggest threats actually come from the civilian policy towards the military, and that the first is that we don't think of the second side of operational energy, which is disrupting the supplies of the enemies. And if you look at the two most recent wars right now in the international system, so the Ukraine war and the Gaza war have been very long and have not really ended, and they don't come to sort of a real end like we've seen wars in the past, because we have basically a set of lawyers running the battle space and saying that you can't disrupt energy to the other side. That's not nice. People. Could you imagine in World War II if we thought about let's fight the Nazis, but make sure everyone in Dresden has a warm blanket. You would not have ended World War II in this way. And the opposite, we looked for decisiveness, how to end the war. So the same thing, the previous administration held the Ukraine back from attacking Russian energy production, energy sources, mainly in order not to disrupt the global oil price. And in the case of the Israel-Gaza war, the administration not only didn't allow Israel to disrupt Hamas's energy supply, said, you got to supply them. You actually got to give your enemy the liquid fuel so that they can keep the tunnels going and can keep the war effort going. So one, we have to, even though some people might find it not palatable that civilian populations might have their energy supplies disrupted, or we might have an increase in global energy prices. If we don't disrupt the other side's energy supplies, we're going to continue to have these endless wars that don't come to some sort of end. The second thing would be is that the military, because it's the largest consumer of energy in the United States, in the case of DoD, the single consumer globally, we often use the military to test out different civilian energy policies, right? So in 2010, the Secretary of the Navy says, within 10 years, Half of the Navy's fuel is going to be renewable. The main source of fuel for the fleet is going to be biofuels, and this was basically in order to promote a biofuels industry in the United States. It really didn't have much to do with what's good for the Navy. And I think in the current strategic environment, with an axis of China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea working together, the military can't be the guinea pig for different energy policies. It needs its energy policy should focus on what helps it win and deter wars. And it can't be just a reflection of some of the civilian, non-military goals.
Rebecca, I want to bring you in specifically on this idea of resilience, of some of these vulnerabilities. Can you give us a little bit of insight into the specific policy initiatives or investments that are coming out of DoD and being prioritized to do things like reduce reliance on vulnerable fuel supply chains or improve battlefield energy security overall?
So I'm going to agree with some things that you said, and I'm going to have to respectfully disagree with others, because I think that there is certainly no place within our operational competencies to bring science fair projects to bear. We need to have some level of understanding of what we're going to do at a commercial scale. However, we do need to investigate what those opportunities could be and some level of divestment that is either aligned alongside the administration priorities. Currently, we are the Office of Primary Responsibility for 4 of the administration's executive orders, which we are really excited to pull the thread on and see what other opportunities we can center the DoD around within the realm of national energy emergency, within the realm of unleashing Alaskan resources and American resources, and certainly excited to bring big, bold ideas for the Secretary to bring forward in the National Energy Dominance Council. But without an understanding of what those opportunities could be, without work with partners like DIU and folks on the outside, we won't see what the next thing around the corner is. Should we do that at scale all the time? Maybe not, but we certainly need to be able to divest from a logistical tail that we know is not bringing anything other than undue burden to our warfighter on the ground. As we think about what resilience means, I think line of sight is going to look something slightly different from service to service, just as we examine what the mission looks like, whether that's air, on land, or on sea, and whether there is an opportunity for us to bolster a civilian resource, whether that's a grid in the continental United States, either from kinetic or cyber attack, or thinking in a more global and nuanced way as we divest from Russian fossil fuels, which is part of a congressional directive that we've received. So I don't know if that specifically answered your question, but as we think about this diversification, it has to have all things on the table to provide best value to the department as we support our warfighter in executing their mission.
But you've brought up another thread where I want to bring in the rest of the panel, which is as we think about the diversity of possible solutions that we have and the innovation horizon that comes from those possibilities, taking things from demonstration to scale and understanding that as you go through that process of scaling and integrating, that these technologies are meeting the acute and precise needs of the warfighter is of the utmost importance overall. So I want to bring in the panel to talk about, what are the challenges to scaling some of these technologies? What are the signals that you need from policymakers in order to make that happen? I think, Newt, I might start with you to talk about how we think about scaling technologies, not just from demonstration to deployment, but also scaling them across different branches and operational environments.
Well, that's exactly what DIU was stood up to be, is to be an organization that lowered barriers to entry for good ideas to come to bear, for our industrial base to be able to produce what it needs to for us to fight and win. We have got to send a clear message to the industrial base of what we need. And that has been a challenge in the past. We have made the architecture around entering into this ecosystem exceedingly difficult. And that's the two main mission sets that DIU has, is to lower the barriers of entry, to provide synergy between, and make sure we've got a consolidated ask to the industrial base. And then to take our entire .mil-PF framework and to align it so that we can move out and create that scale. So again, as we've flipped the model from requirements generation to problem set identification, that speeds things up in a way that industry can actually respond to. And then we can also look left and right within our, as a helicopter pilot in the Navy, I have very similar requirements to a ground unit in Afghanistan or Ukraine. We all need energy. And as we start looking around and saying, okay, as I'm trying to consolidate the need statements, we're looking to do that. And we're looking to provide a pathway through, over, or around the valleys of death that exist, that industry has trouble navigating, so that we can do that. We have a select, set of authorities that we use with our commercial solution opening and other transaction authority. That provides the pathway. We've had congressional support by elevating us to a direct report to Secretary of Defense and going from $100 million to $1 billion budget. Mm-hmm. Those things matter in being able to deliver scale to industry, to link industry to the warfighter.
Mm-hmm. Jim, I want to let's bring this idea of scale specifically to Project Pele. I mean, what does the pathway to scale look like there, and then what are the demands that what are the requirements that you're looking for from the policymaker? And then, Matt, I think I might like to bring you in as well on this idea of what are the signals that we need from policymakers when we talk about the emerging technology landscape and integrating those effectively. So, Jim, and then Matt.
Yeah, thank you very much. So to me, getting to scale is getting to production. We now at BWXT are not constructing a small nuclear power plant. We're manufacturing a prototype, and we want to get into production. We want to build reactor cores and reactor modules in Lynchburg, Virginia, in shippable containers. That gets you to a scale that I can turn around to Matt and say, I just don't need one-off of a control system or a safety protection system for Pele. I need 10 of them a year, okay? And with that economy of scale allows you to scale better supply chain relationships and address a broader range of operational requirements. Mm-hmm. If I have an active production line, an active supply base, an active team of engineers, then I can turn to the policymaker, I can turn to the services, and I can say, here's my portfolio, here are my opportunities, here are ways when I can scale Pele now I'm going to turn from a scale term of not just economic scale, but to size scale. So once I better understand how to manufacture a very small, high-density power unit, I can introduce engineering variations. I know where the key parameters are that make it hard to build a Pele, and there are lots of them, okay? And we've been diligently diving through all of this stuff. So production at scale drives to opportunity for requirements at bigger or smaller scale. The Marine Corps told me yesterday they don't want a megawatt, they want 300 kilowatts. And then there's spec war guys out there that want a nuclear reactor in a backpack. I don't think I'll live long enough to get after that one, but I'm not going to scoff at that requirement. There's different ways of generating power through radioisotope technology, for example. But to me, getting from a constructing simple thing or constructing one at a time to do serial production of a relatively stable design, brings you all of the knowledge and the supply base that you need to do variations. And the final key to all of this that gets you to scale, it has to be affordable. I can't go to the Marine Corps and tell them I want to sell them a power plant for $500 million. That's half of their acquisition budget for a quarter. I'm kidding, okay? But I have to get to scale and affordability. That's what I think you really have to have to get the full optimal capability out of nuclear power in the field. There's a couple of other enablers. I could talk about this all day, but that's my initial reaction to what it means to scale up.
Matt, I want to go to you because I think this is actually allowing me to double count a few questions that we've gotten from the audience about what does that innovation arc looks like. And I'll ask you to draw upon your experience at Northrop Grumman. Northrop Grumman plays a critical role in power conversion and energy management systems for military platforms. What does that innovation arc look like for Northrop Grumman? And then taking it back to what we were just discussing, how do you, what are the needs from the policymaker that you're looking for in terms of requirements or supply chain management? They're going to help you build in and integrate at scale across the various branches.
Sure. So innovation obviously is a very important part of what we do in terms of trying to bring new capabilities to the customer. From 1952 when we did the first nuclear instrumentation and controls for the Nautilus, to the 57 we did it for Shippingsport, and now we're working with BWXT to do it for the first microreactor. So that's an exciting product to be coming online at this time with these kinds of energy demands that we see across the globe. So we're certainly proud to be part of that. That's one piece of the innovation, and it's a broad spectrum. So we're looking at prime power equipment that can do multiple loads at once. So today on these platforms, your radar comes with its own filter, power conversion, energy storage, cooling system. The EW system's got the same thing. Everything's stovepiped. And so as we talked before, now you've got energy storage that's in each of these systems that never share, can never be used. That's not a very resilient system when it comes to what's my priority and where can I put the energy that's going to be most effective in the situation I'm in. The same thing on the like microgrid side is can I plug this vehicle now into this microgrid? So from an innovation perspective, we've got high-speed microturbines and generators that are fuel flexible, that we can put 16 on a pallet and go drop it in the field. So you want instead of just one major power plant, now you can get that diversity and that resilience by having multiple small ones where that's effective. And then data is a big piece of that too from an innovation perspective. And that's another thing that we've been working on from being able to know what energy resources you have access to, what's the fuel type you need. So kind of having that command and control aspect of where the energy is and how I can utilize it most effectively is a very important piece from an innovation perspective. On the
What we need from
scale,
policymakers.
the scale, the next question. I think it really is about the demand signal, because that allows companies to start investing and start to kind of ramp up with that expectation that there's going to be something on the end of that. So that's a big important part, is just understanding where it's all going and what the demand signal is going to be allows those gears to start turning and get supply chain lined up. We know we have supply chain challenges. You can't do electronics without that. You have all the different semiconductor materials. If you've got motors, you've got permanent magnet materials that are coming from all over the globe. So the supply chain challenges are certainly there. And being able to predict what that demand is going to be allows us to start better diversifying that supply chain. And as Jim mentioned, having that product line hot, having those engineers hot, and that thing going and cranking out is very important to kind of keep that going. And another piece of that, kind of tying in the innovation side, is commonality. And so something that we focused on at least for 10, 15 years now is trying to develop products in this power conversion and control portfolio. So now I've started to kind of streamline my supply chain and the parts that I need. I can start putting things on the shelf now and be ready for that next build because it's using 90% of the same components that were in that previous build. And that architecture is the next piece of that. So there's the building block pieces of it, and then at the architecture piece, how effectively can I use those building blocks to get me a very flexible and scalable type of architecture. And so that architecture piece, the lower level piece, the demand signal, all these things have to come together, really, I think, to put a very strong plan in place to be able to ramp at scale and support to the level that we need.
Yeah, you brought up demand, and it dovetails on something Jim noted about the varying requirements that you see from the various branches. It gives me an opportunity to pull in a question from the audience that, Rebecca, I think I'll direct to you, which is the diversity of operational energy requirements across the various branches is pretty extraordinary. What does this mean for coordinating joint operations across multiple domains, and how are you in DoD thinking about that?
That's a really good question.
Well, I'm doing my job by asking the good questions.
Yep. So I do want to maybe put one refining point on what the gentlemen to my left were just talking about, and differentiate between the innovation landscape in potential diversification of technology innovation that could come into the department, and the use of the Defense Production Act to ensure there's a solidification of supply chains in any area of aspect that the Defense Department needs to be able to ensure continuity of operations. We throw DPA around a lot, and we also throw innovation around a lot, and those mean very different things, and they're frequently conflated when we talk about diversification of supply chains as both an innovation landscape and DPA aspect. We are starting to think about the paradigm of the existing system, which includes DPA, as part of a conversation around solidification of American resources as they stand right now, right? So what do we need today to get out of the current paradigm that we are in, and how do we open that aperture around DPA to expand its use in ways that provide better efficacy so that we can execute? Concurrently, what are we doing to innovate our way out of our issues in ways that we may not have even identified a solid requirement, coming now to your question, of what the combatant commands actually need to execute their joint mission. So as we think about the different paradigms of space, of air, of water, of land, what does that mean, and where is it meaningful? So, we'll hear the Marines say that they want something 1/10 the size of what the Don Secretariat needs all the time. For what end? To what purpose, right? Is it just smaller? Is it for a different executionary need? Because if the need is different, then we should put a paradigm of requirement around it that is distinct from the original thing, right? That widget may not be able to be used for time and time again. So I think that's question number one. Why do you need this thing? Do you understand what you're actually trying to solve for? Because if you don't understand what you're solving for, then we should figure out what the solve is. And then how do we use space as a combatant command, right? Space-Com as a combatant command, to refine our thinking about the direction of innovation, because we know that space is going to create a very austere environment for success to be very limited by, and if that success can be limited, if the success is limited, and then we are successful in space, then the widget that we're using in space is going to be more successful elsewhere. So it is understanding what the need is, and then starting to refine those requirements, to Jim's point, in a way that is more specific to understanding what we're trying to accomplish, instead of just establishing a requirement for a need that's been identified. And pushing our service partners and COCOMs into a place where we say, you may not know everything you need to know, and that's okay, but let's start trying to figure out what good looks like, because we haven't really put voice to that yet today.
And thank you for bringing up space, because I thought I had the coolest job in the world, putting several megawatts in a Connex box. So the young lady in the office next to mine at BWXT is building reactors to go into space. And so I tell a lot of people now, all I got to do is model Kate Kelly. She's the BWXT program manager for Draco, who's already shipping hardware for test out of the plant.
I think it's important to build on your point, ma'am, on the need for speed and the agility to be able to learn very quickly the lessons that we are learning from Pele, the challenges, the need for alignment, all of those things, and to be able to quickly redirect and build the next thing that the next effort. So the speed of agility, of being able to start and end programs is critically important, because we can no longer think that everything we do is going to be a 25 to 30 to 50 year cycle of a program. We need to be able to inject capabilities, respond to dynamic environments, and offload capabilities. You see that in the commercial world all the time. Defense is lagging in that, and that's one of the things that from a policy perspective, there's a lot of talk about that with Senator Wicker's bill and building up the industrial base, being able to quickly, rapidly learn, with agility, move in and start new projects. We've got to have the ability to do that.
We have about 5 minutes left, and Newt, I think you might have, jumped on what was pretty good concluding remarks from you on this one. But I do want to go one more time through the panel and give us any final thoughts as we think about what are the key principles that should guide how we think about meeting the operational energy needs of our armed forces moving forward, both at a commercial, defense industrial base level, but also in terms of policymaker signals to coordinate and give industry the tools to help deliver that energy. Matt, we'll start with you, and then we'll do the same question all the way on down before we end with Brenda.
Yeah, again, thanks for having me here. It's certainly an exciting time, from my perspective, working in this technical area. When I was going into grad school, telling people I was doing power electronics, nobody had any idea what power electronics was. So it's nice to see the focus on this discipline, because it is ever so important. It is an enabling capability behind everything that we do. And unfortunately, it's not realized usually until you go to push the power button and you have a problem. So that's it's nice to see the focus and the momentum behind this kind of technical realm. In terms of the policy aspects of it, we're talking about, the agility is certainly a big piece of this, because it is such a rapidly changing environment. And the last 10 years have been really changing technically quite a bit, from the detailed lower level power electronics to the energy storage, of course, with electric vehicles and renewable energy. So there's a lot of things changing, and of course, data availability. Those things haven't all quite meshed yet, I don't think, in terms of how it's all going to come together from an operational energy perspective. And there's a lot of things happening to make that, but having that agility, because it will change. We know that. The one thing we do know, it's going to be different in the next 5 years. And so the agility to react to that is very important. And really, I think that, I'm the technical kind of product guy. So it starts there. It starts at that lower level, designing in flexibility, having a complete understanding of what your hardware is, what your software can do, and how you can make it flexible and malleable to that next challenge. And so I think that's a big important part, and it's a great time for that because of the technology advances we have in devices and digital controls and data. So I'm excited for the future in this arena for sure. Looking to be more agile and being able to address some of those operational energy needs moving forward.
Newt, we've mentioned agility and flexibility a few times here. What should we be looking out? What should be guiding us as we continue to unpack this issue moving forward? Because it's certainly not going away.
Absolutely not. One thing I would say is that there are no safe spaces anymore. The need for energy is ubiquitous to every capability we have, every system, every person, every capability we have has a foundational grounding in energy. So what I would say is there are no wasted efforts, and we need every advancement. Even if that particular effort seems to have led to a dead end, we are going to learn something from that. And we need to accelerate that learning. That is what innovation is accelerated learning so that we can accelerate the capability gains that we can achieve. So this is an all hands on deck fight. We are in it now, and for us to truly win, we've got to achieve the level of capability to achieve deterrence. And that means that we need to be in sprint mode now. And all hands on deck means everybody has a way to contribute, whether you're industry, whether you're policy, whether you're a warfighter, or whether you're a Silicon Valley innovator. Every bit of it matters, and we're looking to build the team and get this going.
Mm-hmm. Jim, any final comments? What can we look to next as far as Project Pele is concerned?
Well, thanks. Just generally, don't underestimate the value of informed debate in academia, which shapes sound policy and gets us moving forward. As Sean Stackley once told me, discussion is good, disagreement is okay. Progress is essential.
Rebecca, any final comments? Obviously we're in the throes of a new administration kind of beginning to come into its own on a number of issue areas, this one included. Where do you see the big white space that's going to be filled by the department in the coming years on this space?
Well, happily, mission readiness has always equated to mission resilience. And we have had a perspective on that in the department for decades, certainly well before I got to the Department of Defense, and I think well after my time having left or leaving the Department of Defense. So the good news there is the mission is durable because of the focus on readiness and resilience, and that is the perspective irrespective of administrations. What we're looking forward to in this administration is the focus on ensuring that there is durability in our supply chains. We're looking forward to putting everything on the table and seeing what we can use in years to come, and in thinking through what good looks like, pressing ourselves to be even better. I think that is that's the big white space on the table. So we are thinking about the executive orders certainly in disparate ways, right? What do we have? Where do we want to be? And what does bold action look like? And pushing ourselves there is tantamount. But at the core of everything we do is the warfighter. And if the warfighter is not at the core of everything we do or the thing that we're trying to do, then we throw it away because it's not where the mission needs to reside. And I think that is something that is durable irrespective of who's sitting in this seat.
Mm-hmm. Brenda, you wrote this book partially because the DoD is the largest consumer in the United States of energy, both in terms of what it does here, but also what it does abroad, all in the spirit of advancing the national security of the United States. When we think about the diversity of issues we covered today, what are we missing, and what should we keep our eyes on the ball for as we cover this issue?
Yeah, so first I'd like to point out that the book was co-authored with Dr. Daniel Nussbaum and Alan Howard at the U.S. Naval Postgraduate School, and a few principles. One is energy density. It's relevant to the commercial sector, but civilian sector, but it's especially relevant to the military. Density means how much energy you can pack into a specific space or weight. And so many of the new ideas on energy are not energy dense. They're less dense than the fuels that they want to replace. And we've seen this through history. Energy transitions have always taken place to more dense fuels. So anytime someone comes to you with something less dense than what you're using today, say no. That would be one principle. Second is no golden calves. And I think this is especially more for the civilian sector than for the military, but you can come to Congress and say, hey, hydrogen, yeah, that sounds cool, right? That's like modern and that. But if you look into the cost, the lack of density, the flammability, explosiveness, right? I mean, the EU and the last administration allocated $60 billion each for something that industry now is kind of saying, nah, That's especially too dangerous for the military in terms of flammability. So we just throw away money like that. And so on one hand, I agree with panelists, you have to innovate, you have to be open, but we can't just throw money at every golden calf, and we have to evaluate these things a bit more seriously before we allocate so much money. And then maybe third principle, that if the civilian energy sector isn't secure, or let's just say that the civilian energy sector is going to be part of the next battle. And even something as simple as, can you imagine if a Super Bowl was disrupted, the electricity, and for 2 hours, while the US was fighting a war, what that would do to morale, what kind of panic that would create, how that would affect the American support for a war abroad by something as simple as disrupting, simple to say disrupt a football game, but yes, simple as disrupting a football game. So we're extremely vulnerable. Our populations, are not ready for electricity disruptions. They don't handle them well. And if the civilian sector isn't secure, the military won't be secure.
So it's really an appreciation for the fragility in some ways that we're exposed to, but the urgency of meeting those needs with agility and flexibility where we need. But Brenda, to your point, the discipline to understand that we're working in a time of limited capital, and frankly, we don't have a lot of opportunities to get things wrong, right? And we have to be precise in terms of what we're doing. Well, I think that sums this discussion up well. I'd like to thank our panelists for joining us today and kicking off our thinking here about this nexus of energy and defense here at the Atlantic Council. So let's give them a round of applause, and thank you all for joining us today.